I said in our last principle that when you plant, we suggest you keep three things in mind: purpose, planning, and priorities. And we've looked at purpose, missional vision. Let's briefly look at planning. And can I suggest to you that whatever your leadership style, whether you are a dreamer or a strategist, whether you are kind of big picture or small picture, and whether you love people or are terrible with people, whatever it is, in this thing you are leading, you must be intentional about making and growing disciples, and therefore you must plan for it. And very briefly, here are some reasons again why it's so vital to do some planning. Firstly, and it's going to sound like an obvious one, if we do not plan to make and grow disciples, we simply won't. It's not a natural impetus, even actually amongst planting organizations and planting groups. We use the word intentional so often in Cultivate, because that is big. As we were talking about missional vision, unless you plan for it, unless you are intentional about it, it won't happen, or else it will happen randomly. It will happen by default rather than by design. Second reason, unless you plan for it, you probably won't pray for it. Prayer and planning are completely interconnected. It is when we start to pray for stuff that plans emerge, as we know, and when our plans are formed, particularly ambitious ones, we know we need to pray to actually achieve them. It's so often that it is when we become intentional about something collectively that we start to pray about it collectively. A third reason it's so vital that we have a whole separate principle for it. And that is principle number 16. Unless we plan for it, we will not invest in the whole discipleship journey. Invest in the whole discipleship journey. And one of the lessons we learned as planters, not as early as I had wished, because I'm slow with this stuff, is that we needed to invest in and plan for the whole discipleship journey. As a leader, once you have discerned your call and vision, once prayer and discernment has become the cornerstone of your sort of journey, once you've gathered the actual right people and kept the wrong people away, once you've worked out your sort of context and identified missional vision, then you can start to plan for and invest in the whole discipleship journey. And in Cultivate, we've worked out something to help you do this. We have a 5 kind of stage process for that, and for some people this is going to be too simplistic, and for others 5 stages is 2 or 3 stages too many. But hang in there. It is simple. It is not sort of rocket science, but if you make your plan around this, I guarantee it, you will see fruit in the people you are working with. Here are 5 stages: engagement, encounter, early, mature, and leader. And here's what we mean by them. Engagement, the first stage, is about building relationships and meeting need and making contact with those who are the focus of our missional vision, who are part of the context that we are called to. It is vital that you have a plan for this. What is your plan for how you're going to engage those who are the focus of your missional vision? And actually, churches have been very good at this for hundreds of years. Churches usually have no problem in building relationship and making contact and meeting the needs of those in their sort of context. The problem for us is moving beyond this stage. I mean, you may well know that the greatest provider for young families, for carers and sort of young kids in this country is still churches. Churches still engage with that demographic, carers and young kids, more than any other organization, bar none. And it's usually, obviously, through mother and toddler groups. Many churches do that. But most of these groups, the truth is, these groups do not make and grow disciples. Of course, there are exceptions. Some of them do that. But in general, it's not happening. And that is because they have a brilliant plan for engagement, and they have worked out how they're doing that well. What they haven't got a plan for is how to move them on to the next stage, which is encounter. Very simply, this means planning for and praying for and working towards an encounter with Jesus. Very simply, it's that. This will look different in every single context, but it's being intentional about it. What is your plan in your situation to move people from engagement to an encounter with Jesus? It must be contextual. It must be natural. It must make sense for that as a context and culture, but you must plan for it. Unless you plan for it, it ain't going to happen. And Alpha is a great tool for this. Alpha is a classic sort of encounter tool. It's used in many different contexts globally, but it might not be right for yours, but it might be. Once you've made engagement, have a plan for encounter, whatever that is. Third stage is early discipleship. Once people have made an encounter with Jesus, how are you going to disciple them in the early days and months? What's it going to look like? How are they going to grow? How are you going to introduce them to the Bible and prayer and the Holy Spirit and a community, whatever it is? And the vital thing about this, you know what I'm going to say, it must be contextual. It must make sense for that group of people. It must make sense for that culture. It must fit in with their life and patterns. And that's why it needs work. It needs attention. It needs your prayer and discernment. What works for you as a leader and planter may well not work for those people. Be creative, be contextual, be intentional. Once you have encounter, how are you going to plan for early? And then we have two more stages. Mature, couldn't think of another E. And this means about obviously deepening and broadening their discipleship and leader, how you're going to grow and develop their gifts and calling. And in Cultivate, we say don't worry too much about these later two stages. You'll have to keep them in view and in due course, certainly think about them. But at the very beginning, make sure you have your plan for your 3 E's. Know how you're going to engage, plan for encounter, prep for early discipleship, invest in the whole journey, discipleship journey. And let me just say 2 or 3 more comments about this plan, this answer to this what question, what are you planting? The first point is, I've said it 100 times, but I'm going to say it again because it's so important. Make it contextual. It must make sense for that culture in which you're in. Secondly, I've said it 1,000,000 times, be intentional. Know why you're doing what you're doing. Every activity you undertake, be able to have a reason for why you are doing it. We're doing this to engage. We're doing this to bring encounter. We're doing this for early discipleship. Be able to have an answer for why you're doing what you are doing. And linked to that is our third point. Don't have unconnected events. Don't do an activity of engagement if you don't know how it's going to link toward encounter. Be deeply prayerful, but highly planned. Know how your stages are linked. Don't let them become unconnected. And that is because, fourth final thing, recognize that discipleship is a journey. To ignore that is both negligent and counterproductive. It is like going on a sort of marathon kind of car drive and having a large stretch of it without any kind of fuel stations. The car will stall in those sections of that journey. People grow as disciples. We need to attend to every stage of that journey. So if we do not plan to make and grow disciples, we won't. Unless you make a plan for it, you are unlikely to pray for it. Unless we plan for it, we will not invest in the whole discipleship journey. And fourthly and finally, which is again so important, that we have an entire principle for it. And our next principle, unless we plan for it, the urgent will overtake the important.